I'm Cara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Carl Vonderau. Carl is an award-winning author of crime fiction. As a child growing up in Cleveland, he loved to write. His ghost stories scared the bejesus out of other kids, but it took a long time to become a full-time author. He left Cleveland to study at Stanford, then spent more than 30 years as a banker in the US, Latin America, Canada, and North Africa. Those international settings were sources of inspiration for his books. His first novel, Murderabilia, was published in 2019 and won a Left Coast Crime Award for Best Debut and a San Diego Book Award for Best Mystery. His second novel, Saving Myles, was published on August 15, 2023. Working with nonprofits is also important to Carl. He is the president of Partners in Crime, the San Diego chapter of Sisters in Crime, an organization that supports authors and fans of crime writing. He also volunteers with San Diego Social Venture Partners to mentor other nonprofits. Carl lives with his wife in San Diego. His two grown sons live close by and wonder how he knows so much about serial killers and banking crimes. Welcome to the show, Carl.
Thank you, Cara. Thank you. It's going to be fun to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad. Listeners, I actually had the pleasure of meeting Carl recently at the San Diego Festival of Books and got drawn in by his book, Saving Myles. And I had my kids in tow, so it was a little bit, sometimes I feel like a scatterbrained squirrel type of conversation when I'm tracking an 8, 5, and 3-year-old sometimes. But I was really intrigued and he reached out. And so here we are. And now I finished Saving Myles at the beach this weekend. That was lovely. But it is a fantastic read. Thank you for sharing this with me.
Good. I'm so glad you said it was a fantastic read.
Yes.
It's always a relief for an author when somebody likes your book.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I remember there was a gentleman standing by your booth there, and he said, "Oh, it reminded me of a John Grisham type novel," and it definitely did. It's been a long time since I've read John Grisham, but it took me back. Those were some of my first books I loved reading as an adult. So,
That's interesting. Because when I haven't read. Well, I've listened to some Grisham books, and one of the books I read a long time ago was The Firm.
Okay.
And I always wondered, what would it be like if there was a bank that was controlled by the mob or the cartel? So, and that's what happens in this book.
Yeah. And it's really not that far-fetched, right? And that's what I think I love about it. It seems like a very realistic, this could be happening.
It could be. It could be. I had to do a lot of research on kidnapping, on money laundering. So some of those parts of the book would be accurate.
Yeah. And for any listeners that might have lived or currently live in San Diego, you will appreciate a lot of it because it's set here in La Jolla and down in Tijuana. And I loved traveling through the pages and stuff I see locally every day.
Oh, nice. Well, I like to visit the places where my books are set. And so I had some friends from the YMCA who worked with the YMCA in Tijuana. And I said, can you show me where some, kidnapping might occur, or where the rich people live, or where a shelter for street kids might be? And so I toured around Tijuana with these friends, took pictures, wrote things down. And I remember going to the first place for the kidnapping. And it was this plaza with all these bars and swirling different types of music from bar to bar to bar. And all kinds of people. You could smell the marijuana. And I thought, well, could a kidnapping occur here with all these people here?
Yeah.
So we went out to the parking lot, and there were guards out in the parking lot and people walking around. No, not there, but there was this driveway that went underground. And they went underground, and there, in parts of the concrete ceiling were falling on the floor. It was wet. There was mildew. There was a broken light bulb on the ceiling. And I thought, perfect.
Yeah. Even as you're painting that picture, even having read the book,
Yeah.
and now you're painting this picture, I'm like, yeah, that's like the perfect setting for a kidnapping right there.
Yeah, yeah. So you never know. And then, the rich people live up on the hillside in these compounds that are like several hundred yards, some of them, with these
Wow.
walls around them and guard cars on the street and these sort of malnourished trees on the street with lacking water. But you can imagine behind these walls are probably gardens,
Yeah.
really lush vegetation, almost no windows facing the street because they're worried about security.
Wow.
But the windows face a view of Tijuana. So I thought, wow.
Yeah. So did you already have a storyline kind of going in your head and then just traveling and visiting these places really helped cement the way the story was going to go for you?
It did. I mean, well, there are two things that are the basis of the story. One was what I talked about with, the firm. What if a bank was controlled by a cartel? But
Yeah.
that's just the plot line. Underneath is a dysfunctional family. And my motto in writing books is that behind every crime is a family,
Yeah.
both for the perpetrators as well as the victims. So that's really where the story is, the dysfunctional family with 3 points of view of how they fight and how they come together in order to survive.
Yeah. I loved that bit of the storyline, right? Of the families trying to come back together to do what they needed to do. And I think that's a beautiful thread that went through the book there.
Thank you.
I also was, you have, based off your bio, and we know this, but you have a history and you were a banker first.
I was.
Okay.
But I was always I've been a writer for a long time. It's just taken me a long time to publish. I go back to my childhood where I repeated kindergarten, and so that's sort of the theme of my life. It takes me a little longer than everybody else. so and I was raising kids, and my wife and I were raising kids. We lived in Montreal. I had more than a full-time job. I had to learn French while I was there, and every 15 minutes I would try and write.
Okay.
So if I finished work at 6 and the bus didn't come till 6:45, I'd go to a coffee house and I'd write like mad. Just
Yeah.
write as fast as I could. And it takes all the editing out of it, which is really great for a first draft. So I was writing and writing and writing, but it was really wasn't until we moved to San Diego where I kind of had the resources to help me become a better writer. Uh,
Okay.
because there were conferences. You could submit pages to editors at these conferences or other authors, critique groups, a whole community here supporting. So that's where I became a much better writer.
Yeah. And how many years had you been writing before you got here in San Diego?
Let's see, I must have been writing 10 or 15 years before
Okay.
that. We came in 2005. So I've been, writing for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think as you're talking about like fitting in these 15 minutes, I had a guest on the show. Her name was Cynthia Newberry Martin, and I can't think of what episode number that is off the top of my head,
yeah,
but she was a lawyer and
uh-huh,
she, after from having baby three into baby four, started staying at home with her children. And she has post-it notes, and she's a really, I think, like a detail oriented person based off our
yeah.
conversation, where she would write down how many free minutes she had in her day to
Wow,
write. And it was like
wow.
starting back when her youngest, before, the fourth child was a young, like
Yeah,
a, I don't know, maybe first year of life. And she's
yeah.
like, I remember looking at this post-it note and thinking, I only had 2 free minutes back then. And now she's just published her third book. And so I think of her as you say that, of just, that seems to be the theme, right? Of whether we're reading or we're writing, is you just fit it in your day. It's what you love. And so
Yeah,
you make space. You can't always make time, but in
yeah.
the little time you have, you use it for that.
You do. And I won't say I always love it, but it's what you
Okay.
have to do, right?
Yeah.
You just have to do it. So,
So
yeah.
back then in your Montreal days, I were, did you say you were a writer at that point?
No, no.
Okay.
I never told anyone at the banks I worked for that I was writing books, but I think people kind of guessed it at some
Yeah.
points. But because it wasn't good for my career. people would have thought he really wants to be a writer. He doesn't want to be a banker.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's funny you say that as well because I'm a physical therapist by trade
yeah,
and I'm now a podcaster about books and that's been
yeah,
just function of lots of moves as well.
yeah,
Um but I think about that often of like, well, that was my professional life, but now I actually really love podcasting and talking about books. So I'm like, when do I just kind of just embrace that and make the
yeah,
shift?
yeah. Well, and you'll find that you combine everything,
Yeah.
right? So, you at some point your physical therapy is going to seep into what you do about books.
Yeah. And I
And
can
for
feel that already in like the
Can you?
interviewing process.
Yeah,
I think, I have 45 minutes with a patient to learn their whole life story and figure out why they're coming to me and what they need from me. And
yeah.
so I have found that it has worked. That has translated really well into podcasting is the interviewing.
There you go. And here I kept hidden that I was a writer as a banker, but all my books so far take place in the banking setting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So when you first got started writing, were you using writing prompts or how did you have a storyline you were working on then?
well, I've tried all different kinds of things.
Okay.
I wrote a book for 10 years that wasn't published, but and that took place primarily in Colombia, but you learn a little bit more. And then the next book, Murderabilia, took me a while to write. That was a very detailed outline,
Okay.
but it kept changing. And then for Saving Myles took me a little less time. Outline, got away from an outline, back to an outline. I just kind of go back and forth because an outline is great because it gives you something to aim for, gives you a next scene to go. But at the same time, some of your best ideas come when you're writing and you change direction.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a great rewriter. I mean, my first book, Murderabilia, I wrote more than 20 times. And this
Wow.
one's probably 10 to 15 times for Saving Myles. And the one I'm working on now, I'm revising. So,
Wow.
and it'll probably be 5 or 6 times anyway. So I guess I'm getting better.
This is what I admire most about writers is just that perseverance of spirit, whether it's 20 rewrites. I feel like I don't know that I could do that. And then
Yeah.
just the process of getting it published. I mean, that's
Oh,
lengthy in
oh
itself
yeah.
and
Oh
coming to
yeah.
fruition to be a book on the page. I'm like, you guys have the perseverance of spirit that I aim for.
Well, I always say that the two most important talents for a writer are patience and tenacity.
Okay. Love
Far
that.
more important than your writing ability.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Because you're with it for a while.
you're with it for a while. And I mean, getting my first book published was it was a whole odyssey.
Yeah.
So, I had an agent, he dropped me, had to get another agent, then the publisher, 3 months after I signed the contract, they closed their doors, but they said they would still support me. And then it was up
Oh.
for an award at Left Coast Crime here in San Diego, and the conference was canceled the day after it started.
Oh.
So it's just it seemed like it was one thing after another, but on the
Yeah.
other hand, I found an agent that was better suited for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I won the prize, at Left Coast Crime. So what have I got to complain about, right?
Yeah. It's
So
funny. As I get older, this is what I think about, right? Is I thought life would go one way and all the time it's taking a left turn. And I'm like, well, I didn't see that coming, but let me embrace it for
yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've ended up using all the places where I worked and lived, in my
Yeah.
books. And I'm kind of fascinated by different languages and how one language seeps into another. And, that comes from personal experience. I mean, one of my favorite stories in Montreal is that I was learning French. And so I would speak French every place I had a chance. So I go into a coffee house and there are these two women servers there and they're complaining about men in English. Oh, men are this, men are that. This.
Okay.
So I order my cafe latte in French, and they immediately begin speaking Greek.
Just kidding. We weren't speaking English.
They recognized my English accent immediately and went to something they knew I couldn't do.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, I guess that works with like, hey, I was fitting into the culture as well, because I think there's something to be said there, right? Of moving and living in other countries and you do just want to fit in, right? Like you don't want to be like sticking
Right.
out. Yeah.
Well, you do and you don't. I mean, you're special for being an alien in Montreal, right?
Yeah.
And so I would tell people in French, excuse my French, but I'm American and I'm learning French. And because I wasn't Canadian, they would give me all kinds of leeway, right?
Yeah.
So you'd use it. You'd use it. And
Yeah.
I always say that I never felt more American as when I was in Canada and more Canadian as when I'm in the US.
I love that. Where
Yeah.
has been your favorite place you have traveled?
I don't know. I love Colombia. I traveled
Okay.
as in high school to Colombia, and it's a beautiful country. I
Yeah.
mean, it's got jungle, mountains, desert. It's got sea coast, everything. And it has a history of violence too, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful country. I think Canada is a beautiful country. I
Yeah.
mean, Montreal, you can drive for 40 minutes and be totally outside of the city and into countryside. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, yeah,
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
If you could go back and tell your younger writer self something that you know now, what would you tell yourself?
I'd say get involved with critique groups with other writers earlier
Yeah.
and get feedback earlier.
Is it
Um,
scary to put yourself out there like that?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, here's what I think there are 5 stages to writing a scene,
Okay.
and so the first time you write it, it's okay. Second time you look at it, no, it's better. Third time is wow, if I can just sustain this. The fourth time is there are prizes for writing this good. And the fifth time is this is crap.
You cycle all the way back, huh, to the
All the way
beginning?
back, all the way back, and start again.
Interesting. Okay. So, and was that's kind of what you go through personally. So that's not
Yeah.
even with the critique or the feedback groups.
Oh, that's often related to the feedback from your
Okay.
group. And then you get into a critique group and you find what you think was brilliant, you missed the barn, and what you thought was just so actually is pretty good. So,
Okay.
it really helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I imagine just being able to bounce those ideas off people as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. Sometimes they help you solve some problems. And, this doesn't make sense or this doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always good to have those people in your corner, right?
Yeah, yeah. Although it can be rather humbling.
Yeah. Do you, when you're part of those groups, do they kind of group it by genre? Like, are you all writing a similar, maybe crime fiction, let's say?
No, no, I'm in a
Okay.
group which is more literary. Um, and so it helps me be more literary in my writing.
Yeah.
So it's more character driven, more internal
Okay.
driven. So my internal sort of thoughts have become better as a is because of that group.
Yeah.
So I think it
Yeah.
helps. I think it helps being outside the crime writing group because you get a different perspective,
Yeah.
more
Uh,
character driven.
yeah. I can imagine, like you said, just everybody comes from a different place, so they're going to be contributing something different to your story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Okay. Well, and then one other question here about your writing. What did
yeah.
you learn about yourself?
Huh. Well, I think for me, writing is a way to synthesize my life,
Okay.
all the different things I've lived and have happened to me, and you put a plot around it, and you have some realizations that you didn't have before, and you draw a different meaning that I didn't think of before. So, I mean, like with Saving Miles, what does it mean to be a father?
Hmm.
That's very, I kind of delve into that. And even more important, it has 3 points of view, right? So one is the father, one is the wife, mother, and one is the teenager. And the wife, mother, is extremely angry at her father, at the husband, because he's been totally absent in bringing up their son, and she's sacrificed everything for her son. And now they've got a problem. And she has an affair with a much younger man. And I don't have any experience with this,
Hmm.
but but I had to sort of delve into it and read about it and what makes a woman unsatisfied with her marriage. Why would she have an affair? What does she get out of the affair? And why would she come back to the family? So I learned all kinds of things about that.
Yeah.
And the teenager too. The teenager, how do I do a teenage voice? I'm not a teenager, right?
I was just going to say that you did such a good job with the dialogue of the teenager.
Oh, thank
I
you.
thought you did a
Thank
great
you.
job there.
Well, that was hard. Let me tell you about that. Speaking of revising, okay. So I thought, how do I do a teenage voice? Well, I got to sound like a teenager.
Yeah.
So I looked up all this slang for teenagers. And my writing coach, Carolyn Wheat, who's really well known
Okay.
around here, she said, who are your readers? And they're not teenagers. And then she said, should your readers need a dictionary to understand your writing?
Yeah.
So I cut out most of that.
Okay.
And what I'd left a few things in that were obvious by where they were in the dialogue.
Sure.
And I tried to be more in terms of the point of view of what was important to a teenager. And, that resentment of a teenager, that idealism of a teenager, romance is above everything as a teenager. And that's the way I try to approach Myles.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was great. I highly enjoyed it. Listeners, it's Saving Myles. Go get yourself a copy. It's out now. And I already know I'm going to be passing this book on to my husband. This seems right up his alley. So,
Oh,
and,
good. Thank
and
you.
like you said, with the father perspective, I think he'll really enjoy it too.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Yeah, we can all be better. It's the thing. We all think we can be better parents.
oh, yeah,
And,
I think
and,
the same and same thing 100 as a mom.
and these kids, a lot of parents now find that they can't control their teenagers and they're beyond them. They can't help them anymore. So they send them to these residential treatment centers because, they have to save their lives.
Yeah.
And that's kind of behind the story there. And I think a lot of parents feel that way today. There are over 10,000 kids sent to these treatment centers in Utah or Montana or Texas.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're sort of wilderness programs as well as treatment centers.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, yeah. And the quality really varies.
Yeah. Wow. Makes me sad for sure
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
about,
But the kids grow up and they come back to the families and you're still a family unit no matter what
yeah.
happens. So
Yeah,
that's
gotta love them through it, right?
well, if I were to say the theme of this book is that no matter how troubled the marriage or how broken the teenager, they can still come together to survive as a family and grow to forgive each other and cherish each other.
Yeah.
So that's
Love that.
yeah.
Love that. Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on for Saving Myles. Let's switch gears a little bit. And why don't you tell us who you are as a reader? What genres do you enjoy reading?
I read all kinds of genres, although I don't read historical. So I
Okay.
read all fiction, and I don't
Okay.
read short stories really.
Okay.
So it's all fiction writing, but I'll read literary, I'll read popular. I read a lot of crime and mystery because that's my genre.
Yep.
But my writing is character driven, so that's what I'm drawn to.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you were saying, the literary fits in there as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not really a literary writer, but I try to be.
Have you always been a reader?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, let me tell you a story. Okay, so
Okay.
Um, when I was in well, first of all, I repeated kindergarten. So, and then I was kind of slow to read, second
Okay.
grade, and my school didn't have a library. So my parents moved to a different suburb with a library. And this library had all these fictionalized books of childhoods of famous people. They all had blue covers and they had
Okay.
pictures and silhouettes of these kids and the people that meant something to them. And so what their lives were like as children, it was all made up, of course, but
Yeah.
I read those and my father said, no television after dinner. So all I did was read after dinner. And I must have read 50 of those books.
Wow.
Yeah. All,
What were the title on these?
oh, I don't know, Thomas Edison, the George Washington Carver is, I can't
Okay.
remember what the titles were.
Okay.
I've looked for the publisher and I haven't been able to
That's why I was
find
like,
it.
oh, my son is like a voracious reader now. Like I almost can't keep enough books in the house
Yeah.
room. And we have the same, like we don't do TV after dinner, and he can now he's to the point he has a little like clip-on booklight on his bed, and I'm like, if you want to stay up reading, I don't, as long as you're in bed and like quiet, you can read as long as you'd like. Yeah, you know.
Well, that's great. Well, let me tell you what my parents were like. I used to sneak reading books at night too. And
Okay.
I had this lamp that was a green vase with a little ship inside it. And I would have my hand on the light and reading the book. So when my parents opened the door, I'd switch off the light and go under the
Pretend.
covers and pretend. And they would pretend like they didn't see it, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. I think about, and that's what is like on the bottom bunk. So he kind of makes this
Yeah.
fort, and I'm like, it's fun. If to be a
Yeah.
kid again, right? I'm like,
Oh
go in
yeah. Well,
your,
let me tell you another story. Let me
yeah.
grab something.
Okay.
So when I was about 12, I read a book that I just loved, and it's called The Prince of Omea.
Okay.
And I, for some reason, I don't even remember that much about the book, except a boy who's going to be king, and they have to escape because the other tribe is taking over, and he has this horse and all. And for some reason, I always remember reading this book. So a couple of years ago, it's out of print, but I sent away for a copy of it,
Okay.
and here it is.
Oh, that's so fun.
And I won't read it. I
I was going to
refuse
ask
to
you if you
read it.
did. Okay.
No, I refuse to read it because I'll tear it apart and it might
Yeah.
not be that good. And I just want to remember what it was like to feel that way when I was a kid.
Yeah. The magic of when you read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I've actually considered revisiting books that I've said are my favorite for a long time now that I've read 8, 10 years ago. I'm like, maybe I should revisit them and see if they're still a
Mm.
favorite in that category.
Yeah. Well, some of them are. I mean, you read Mystic River again, or you read Winter's Bone again, or some of those, they really hold up.
Yeah.
Or The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Oh my God, that's a great book.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So now
yeah,
in your busyness of life, how are you structuring your days? I'm assuming you're writing some and then also reading some.
yeah, yeah. I write every day,
Okay.
or I try to, or I do something related to writing. Unfortunately, the last month or so, it's been nothing but promotion.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but but now I'm getting back to revising the book and trying to finish a book in less than 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And so I do that every day. And I both read and I listen to books as well.
Okay.
So so I'll be reading a book and I'll be listening to a book at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
love that audiobooks can just fill these
I
spaces in our day with
I yeah.
menial tasks, right? I'm folding laundry, I'm doing dishes. I just love that audiobooks can fill that space and I still feel like I'm chomping away at a book.
There you go. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get the right narrator and they can bring out so much you never realized. Pat Conroy said
Okay.
he had this narrator he really loved, and he said he'd listened to him, and he says there were things in my books I never realized I wrote until I listened to him read it.
So interesting.
Yeah.
If you think about how much time he spent with his stories, right? And then to be like, no,
Yeah.
it didn't until I heard it. And I think that's right. I mean, we talk about being different types of learners, right? Whether you're visual, whether you're auditory, whether you're kinesthetic, and
Yeah.
whatever that may be. I think we digest things in different ways, whether we're reading it on the page or we're listening to it. I know there's been a few times where maybe I've read a personal development book or a book that I really want to like get in and start writing on the margins or highlight.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I better go buy the hard copy of that too, because I really wanted to dig into the material deeper
Right.
than what I'm getting
Right.
on the audio listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I find that sometimes a lot of crime fiction I can listen to because it's
Yeah.
plot driven, and I'm not so concerned about the style in it, and what they're doing with the sentences. But I mean, for instance, I'm reading The River We Remember, Yeah, and
Yes.
I'm reading the real book there. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yes, that is a fantastic one. You'll have to email me back and let me know what you think about it.
yeah, yeah. Well,
So,
it's like you're
you're from the
listening.
Midwest too,
I am from
so you
Cleveland.
probably
Yeah.
appreciate it from that regard.
Well, I'm not from farm country. I grew up in the city. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Okay. See, I
yeah.
am.
Yeah, there you
I'm
go.
from Chicago, so, but like
Well,
farmland of Chicago.
okay. Yeah,
So
yeah,
I love
yeah.
William Kent Kruger just for that reason, because it pulls me right back to small town
Sure. Yeah.
America.
Well, his setting's very important to him. And I was going to say too, you feel when you read this book like you're sitting next to a friend who's telling you a story.
Yeah.
And he's got this omniscient narrator, but it's much more informal. He's telling you what you need to know that the characters don't necessarily know, but he's telling you because it makes the story better.
Yeah. And he's one of those writers, I think, that takes difficult topics, right? Like there
Mm,
are some topics in his book that are really hard to read about, but I trust him, right, to take me
yeah.
through those.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he said yesterday that he really can't get behind a book unless he loves the characters.
Yeah.
So he's very generous that way, So, and I tried to do that in Saving Myles too, that everybody had a reason for the way they were,
Yeah.
and everybody had a sense of morality, even though it was a different morality for each
Yeah.
family. Yeah.
Well, do you read that way too? Because I find, honestly, if there's a character and it's a main, one of the main characters that I dislike, I really have a hard time plotting
Mm,
through
do
the
you?
story.
Uh, well, sometimes I can. Hannibal Lecter,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You admire him because he's so intelligent, for one thing, but he's also got some values in terms of he's like a lion protecting his cub. He's
Yeah.
that kind of predator, and he has an extreme reverence for courtesy. No matter what you do to
Yeah.
somebody, you're courteous about it.
As wild as that might be about Hannibal Lecter, but here we are.
Well, and in my book, the cartel, they have, I mean, when it comes down to it, they have two basic principles. Your children must survive, and they must live a better life than you do.
Yeah.
And who can't identify with that?
Exactly. I mean, you can't negate them for that, right? I mean, we all want
Right.
that for our children.
Yeah, yeah. And even the cartels in Colombia, they said they used to admire the Kennedys
Okay.
because the father was a bootlegger and the son was president.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
That dichotomy there.
yeah, but well, or that evolving of the family from,
True.
from
Yeah.
violence and crime into being one of the most respected members of society.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, you've given me a lot to think about here.
Well, hopefully not about your children.
Yeah, no, no, but in a good way, right? Of
Yeah.
just history and, looking at that progression of,
I keep going back to my book. One of the most complex characters is Andre Ouellet, who's seeking redemption.
yeah.
And the symbol for him is alchemy, because there have been more books written about alchemy than Christianity. And
Wow.
it's changing lead into gold, which is like money laundering, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the alchemist can only do that when he has a spiritual awakening. So the secret of everything is a heightened spirituality, which is what Andre is trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that about more books being written on that. That's
Isn't that
crazy to think
amazing?
about. Yeah. I
Well,
would
for
never.
100,000 years, Yeah, yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't know what it was, but a lot of books. And it's a religion. It isn't just changing lead into gold. It's much, much deeper than that.
Yeah. And I think you've portrayed that in Andre, right? Like like you said, he's trying to live that throughout his life there.
Yeah, he's trying to raise up the
Yeah.
life for himself and his child. And his wife is sort of going, well, all right.
Yeah. Listeners, you got to read the book to find out about the wife and why she
Yeah. Well, at least one side of the family's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
you have been so gracious to prepare a book flight for us as well today. Can you tell us a little bit how they pair together?
Well, so my books have to do with family,
Okay.
and in one way or another. And the first one is Winter's Bone by Daniel Woodrell. And
Okay.
everyone is, a lot of people have seen the movie. It's Jennifer Lawrence's breakout movie, and John Hawkes is in it as he's a phenomenal actor in it. And it's one of those rare things where I think both the book and the movie are brilliant.
Okay.
Um,
You don't
and
always get that.
no, you don't. You don't. And I mean, it's a coming of age. It's a hero's journey of a 16-year-old girl named Ree Dolly, and she lives in the Ozarks. Her family has nothing except a house and some land. She has two much younger brothers.
Okay.
Her mother is psychologically damaged, and her father is a meth dealer.
Oh.
He has been arrested, and the only way he can get a bail bond is to pledge his house and his land for the bail bond, and then he disappears. So
Hmm.
she's 16 years old. If she can't find her father, they lose everything. And so she has to do that. And it's very much about her uh, becoming a woman and sacrificing herself for her family. And
Okay.
yeah, great writing, wonderful descriptions of winter, great characters. It's one of those books that I listened to it first and it brought tears to my eyes, and not many books do that. And then I read it and
Yeah.
it brought tears to my eyes. So it's a wonderful portrayal of a teenage girl on the hero's journey.
Yeah. Okay, I've never heard of this book, so I am
Really?
very
Did you see the
intrigued.
movie?
No, but
Oh my gosh.
I
Yeah.
am not a movie buff by any means.
Okay.
That is my husband's job. I would my days are so loud that when I get
Yeah.
to the end of the day, I'm like, give me a quiet book. Like, I don't want like the TV on in the background.
uh,
I make myself sit there with my husband just so we can like get some time together. But I'm like, oh, I just want like peace and
okay.
quiet at the end of the day, at least right
Okay.
now, at this stage
Yeah.
of my life. So,
Well, what this girl has to go through to try and save her family, it's harrowing.
yeah.
Yeah, but she's tough. So yeah,
Yeah. Oh, well, I love that one. I love the sounds of it. It sounds like it checks all the boxes. And
it
I love a
does.
book that makes me feel all the things. Like if I'm laughing and crying in the book, I'm like, yep.
Well, it's families in the Ozarks trapped by their history and trapped by their
Yeah.
families, and how do you escape it? So from that standpoint, it's depressing, and most of the characters can't escape it.
Yeah.
But she's doing her best to do it. And at
Okay.
the end, there's this wonderful line when her little brothers, who are like 8 and 12 or something like that, and he said, are you going to leave us now? And she says, I don't know what I'd do with myself without the two of you waiting on my back.
Like
So
after all I've been through, I'm still here.
yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Love it. Okay. Well, that was Winter's Bone by Daniel Woodrell. What's the second book of the pairing today?
I liked Mystic River. I've long admired that by Dennis Lehane. And this one actually influenced me when I wrote Saving Myles, because
Okay.
in a normal mystery, you have a dead body or a killing in the first 15 pages. But in this one, there are three boys, 11 years old, and they are offered a ride uh, by some men, and the men end up kidnapping one of the boys and sexually abusing him.
Okay.
Right. And the rest of the book takes place 25 years later. But this incident underlies everything.
Yeah.
And I thought about that in Saving Myles when, they have to send the boy off to a residential treatment center in the first chapters. And the rest of the book takes place 16 months later. So
Yeah.
I thought, if it's the basis for the characters, why not? So in Mystic River, you see them 25 years later, and this experience resonates through all three boys' characters. Dave, the one who was amused, is kind of a shell of a man.
Sure.
Sean is trying to right wrongs by being a policeman, maybe because he could never right what happened to his good
Mm-hmm.
friend. Jimmy is full of rage. He's like a ball of testosterone, and he's involved with the mob. And so what happened? And he's involved very much with families of the mob, and the three boys are kind of like a family themselves after what they went through. So when Jimmy's daughter is murdered, and all the evidence points toward Dave, the man that was sexually
Yeah.
abused, it explodes. And so all those in, assumptions of what the past does to the future
Mm-hmm.
are in that book, and really at the same time it does resonate throughout the whole future. And Dave at one point says that he is like a vampire because he was bitten and now he bites other people. It's
Yeah.
a wonderful motif. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And so it has a tragic ending, and but the the effects of this are just so well done. There's a Wordsworth poem, a famous poem, that says the child is the father of the man, and that's what this book's about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wow. The child is the father of a man. I have to repeat that, right? To like put it in order in my brain here.
yeah, yeah. It's the reverse of what you think.
Yeah.
It's from My Heart Leaps Up. If you ever want to look at the poem, it's
Okay.
very short. I looked it up this morning.
Okay. Oh, I really
The
like that.
child is father of the man. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think it's true of life, right? I mean, if
Totally,
this actually
totally.
happened in real, I mean, this would be what's happening. And it's not like we have these isolated events that happen to us, they are going to persist for
Yes,
our life.
for your life, for your
Yeah.
lifetime. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the things you remember that from when you were a child.
Mm-hmm.
And they just there's a reason you remember them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And even thinking about like what you might, I think our brain might try to protect ourselves to a certain extent, right? Of so maybe they block certain things out, or the rage of this one character or the shell of the other one, right? It's like just
yeah,
how the brain takes it in different routes. All were part of the same event, but it takes it, and that's probably the brain trying to protect you, right? Of like, nope, we're
right,
just we're gonna
right.
have a lot of rage around this, and so we just never feel, or
Yeah,
we're gonna make you a shell so you never feel.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. And his wife, just he can't establish a relationship with his wife, and she has doubts about him because he has doubts about himself.
Yeah.
All I think of it as all arising from this incident when they were kids.
Yeah.
I guess they had war turmoil as well, and that figures into part of it, but I'm taking the more basic line.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, that was Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. And then what's the last book of the pairing today?
Well, of course, who can forget The Godfather, right? Mario
Mm-hmm.
Puzo. And again, it's about family, obviously.
Yeah.
And there are three brothers. I mean, Frito is kind of intellectually challenged, and Sonny again is all testosterone. And then there's Michael, who's trying to escape what his father has done and escape the mob. He wants to live a better life.
Mm-hmm.
Like the cartels in my book, they want that for their children.
Yeah.
Um, and they also have a morality in that book. The father will not deal in heroin. He's totally against that. He refuses it.
Mm-hmm.
He wants his son to escape what he's done. That's a morality, but above everything else is the sanctity of the family. You will save your family no matter what you have to do. And that, of
Yeah.
course, is the downfall of Michael, that he has to kill somebody in order to save his family. So,
Yeah. What a classic here.
what a classic. Yeah, yeah,
I know I briefly told you this before we hit record, but we lived in Sicily for three
yeah,
and a half years. And there's
yeah,
this small village up on the hill where I believe it was set, but the entire village now is just themed of The Godfather. Um, any shops, cafes that you go into up there. The name is skipping me right now with
Yeah.
my tired brain, but I'm like, there's definitely a village. I knew there was they would do tours from the base. You could go up to this Godfather
Oh
village.
my gosh. Oh my gosh.
So,
Wow.
but beautiful area up there. I hadn't been to that town, but the town right north of it, it's where the cruise
Okay.
ships pull in. It's a very beautiful part of Sicily there. So,
Cool. That's why the cruise ships pull in.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm sure they probably do tours from the cruise ship up to this town too, because it's
Yeah.
not far.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay. So that was The Godfather by Mario Puzo.
Yeah.
So, how I love to end the show is with what I call our bonus pairings. They are just a
Yeah.
speed round of questions. You can answer
Okay.
these really quick.
Okay.
Where is your favorite place to read?
I guess the kitchen counter. That's my
Okay.
favorite. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Love it. What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Well, I think those series of books that I talked about before, the
Yeah.
blue covered fictional accounts of famous people, that changed my life. I became a real reader
Yeah.
after that year. I mean, I was in third grade and I read 90 books, and I was
Yeah.
a slow reader before that. So,
And that's what you need, something to ignite your passion of reading there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think mine were like the Goosebumps books.
Oh, yeah,
Those were
yeah.
like what really remember reading multiple of those and Babysitter's Club. And I mean, I don't know that they had a lot of content to them, but it ignited my love of reading, and
There
that's
you
all that
go.
mattered.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I never read much of the Hardy Boys. I read Tom Swift some, but I don't know, those never appealed to me for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's with all of us, right? I mean, I could think there's a great book and I'm like, oh, this is going to be fantastic, but that's just not for the next person.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Like when my kids were about 12 and 13, I said, you got to see this movie. This is a great movie. It's
yeah.
called The Godfather. And they thought it was so boring.
Dad, why do we got to watch this?
Yes.
Oh, goodness. Are you a rereader?
Not too much, but some I do. I mean, like I've read Winter's Bone twice. I've read Mystic River a couple of times. I'd like to read Beartown again. Frederick, have you read that
Yeah,
yet?
I have. It's a great one.
Oh man, yeah, and as a writer, you can study his point of view, because he changes point of view 4 and 5 times in the same chapter, and he does it flawlessly.
Huh.
And he's got these little crystallized vignettes of each character, so that by the end of the paragraph, you know who they are.
Yeah.
So I was very impressed with that, and plus, the whole setup of hockey being a way of life and how you teach boys to become men through hockey, and then the crime in the middle just amps everything up. It's all been prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
know I want to go back and reread that because I listened to that as an audiobook. So I think I would
uh,
enjoy it because it's also part of a series.
yeah, I haven't read the other books.
Yeah, and that's what
Yeah.
I'm like. I would love to go back and maybe start at that one again and just
Yeah.
remind myself of the storyline to then further, go further
Yeah.
into the series.
Yeah. I think I'd like to reread The Things They Carry too by Tim O'Brien,
Yeah.
because there as a writer, you look at objects. Objects are really important in writing. They
Okay.
can really evoke a character in mysterious ways. And this is all about the things that soldiers carried to get them through Vietnam.
Okay.
And so, what was important to them? What did they carry sort of to keep them going? What did they carry to make them think of home? Um, it's like a primer on how to use objects as a writer.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I say that sounds really interesting as well. Thank you for growing my TBR here tonight.
Well,
All right, and then last question here. What are you reading next?
well, I'm reading, The River We Remember right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm listening to a Michael Connelly book, and I haven't decided what I'm going to read after that.
Okay. Which Michael Connelly one are you listening to? Because he's got a lot too.
Desert, what is it? Desert Star.
Okay.
And I mean, he knows all the police procedure in and out.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. And he puts together a good plot and takes it into directions you don't see. So,
Yeah.
And
Cool.
whereas, they're kind of different books, because that's a more plot-centered procedural book, and then The River We Remember is more of a character-driven book, and
Yeah.
how people, I guess, recover from the grief of war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a beautiful book. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us tonight. Not only your time, but
Well,
also
thank
your
you.
love of reading and all about your writing as well.
Well, thank you, Kara.
You
Yeah.
are very
This
welcome.
was fun. This was fun.
Yay! I'm so
Yeah.
glad. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Carl Vonderau and his book flight of crime fiction that involves families. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.